Good morning, folks. I promised to get everyone out by 9:30, so we're going to get started here. First, let me thank you all for coming. My name is David McKay. I'm the chair of the South Borough Economic Development Committee. I'm also a land use, environmental, and business disputes attorney at Myrick O'Connell. But when I'm not at my day job, economic development is one of my big hobbies. So I'm very happy to have you all here today and to see so many familiar faces. I'm, as I mentioned, chair of the Economic Development Committee. I also am a member of Paul Matthews' board at the 495 Partnership, also at the Marlborough Economic Development Committee, and the Metro West Economic Research Center at Framingham State. So these are important issues to all of you and certainly important issues to me. So again, thank you for coming, and we've got an outstanding program for you today. Now, when the invitations started going out, I started to get calls from a number of folks who were saying, what's the Boroughs Plus? What is that all about? Well, I'll have to admit, we just kind of made it up. This is a collection of the economic development committees and the economic development professionals in these 6 communities, the 4 boroughs, Hopkinton and Hudson, and working in partnership with the 495 Metro West Partnership. And one of the reasons why we got this group together was because we sort of discovered that a lot of us were working in relative isolation, that the economic development committees in most towns, they were set up as committees. In Marlborough, as an example, they're set up as an economic development corporation, but almost every town in the Boroughs Plus had some form of an economic development apparatus. And while they were working very hard, doing some amazing things, there wasn't as much coordination between the organizations as there could be, and there were a lot of shared interests. So we decided to start pulling our resources, so to speak, and to get our group together to really provide a platform for shared economic development initiatives, and also to provide some brand recognition and to start building the Boroughs Plus brand. We set up really an outstanding working group with members from each of the 6 Boroughs Plus communities, including Jennifer Burke from the town of Hopkinton, Jack Hunter from the town of Hudson, Tim Cummings and Meredith Harris, who I know are around here in the back table there, from the Marlborough Economic Development Corporation, Kim Foster and Kathy Jobert from the town of Northborough, myself and my fearless colleague from Southborough Economic Development, Pam DiGiovanni, who is our coordinator, her counterpart in Westborough, Francisco Torres, along with Deb Penta, who's their chair, and Jim Robbins, their town planner, and, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself here. And of course, Paul Matthews and Jessica Strunken from the 495 Partnership. One of the things that our group started talking about as we began to get together was that a number of the towns were having economic development summits in one form or another, doing a kind of local municipal program. And it seemed to make sense to start doing, at least this year, to do one regionally, not to cut out necessarily the individual efforts, but to bring our communities together. And that's how we started pulling this together. And really, I have to admit that this probably would not have come together, certainly not without the working group, but most definitely without the efforts of Francisco Torres in Westborough and Pam DiGiovanni in Southborough, who were kind of nipping at my heels, kind of forcing this to get done. And so they certainly deserve a lot of thanks. As, by the way, do Maureen Grenier and Katie Gamble from the Myrick O'Connell Marketing Department. They were out front. Folks, they're the ones that did all of the background work, all of the logistics on this, pulling this program together. So certainly want to thank them. This is also a good opportunity for me to recognize the elected officials in the room. I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing you to the Lieutenant Governor in a moment. Not that she needs an introduction, but also today we have some other elected officials. Representative Hannah Kane is here, Mayor Arthur Vigent from the city of Marlborough, John Rooney, selectman from the town of Southborough, and George Barrett from the town of Westborough, also one of their selectmen. If I've overlooked any of you, I apologize. I think I got most of the elected officials. The Boroughs Plus is an important economic engine, not only for our own economic and financial well-being, but also really throughout the state. We have over 62,000 jobs here in the 6 Boroughs Plus communities. And we are leading the way when it comes to employment. 3.7% unemployment rate, well ahead of Massachusetts' rate of 4.7%, and well ahead of the national rate of 5%. And it's not just a quantity issue, it's a quality issue as well. The jobs that we have here in the boroughs are outstanding jobs. This chart, I couldn't do a PowerPoint without having at least one chart, so I hope you'll forgive me. And I know it's early in the morning for this, but this is a graph of the average wage in the greater Metro West communities put together by the Metro West Economic Research Center at Framingham State. And what you'll see is there's a black horizontal line, which is the US average wage, right at about $50,000 a year. The Massachusetts wage, thankfully, is significantly more than that, above $60,000. But you'll see a number of communities that are significantly above that, including Hopkinton, Southborough, Marlborough as well exceeding the state average and the national average. So the jobs that we have are outstanding jobs. But we're not without challenges here in our region. They include workforce housing, energy and the environment, water, public water needs, wastewater treatment, and of course open space preservation, something that is so important to our communities and one of the reasons why many of us chose to live here in the first instance. So we certainly don't want to lose sight of that. But we have another one, and that's the one that brings us here today: traffic, the last mile connection, transportation. How do we foster the economic development that we all want to see in our communities, while at the same time not making the Boroughs Plus a place that is so congested and so difficult to get around that we sort of lost what it is we were fighting for in the first instance. And that's really what makes economic development and transportation so important to our region. We're fortunate enough to have broad public support for economic development initiatives in the Boroughs Plus communities, but I don't think that's something that we can take for granted, and we can lose this political battle that we have fought so hard to win if at the end of the day what the public connects with economic development is traffic. And if we made their lives worse, they're going to be a lot less inclined to support the economic development initiatives that we all know are so important for jobs, for the welfare of our communities. When our working group started to get together, transportation was an issue that kind of kept bubbling up as a potential topic for today's program. But there was certainly some trepidation, at least I'll admit on my part, because the larger transportation projects, right, the 495-9 interchange, the Mass Pike, the tolling issues, all of these things are a real challenge when you're looking at it from the perspective of a local economic development committee. And you know, you're talking to the selectmen, as an example, about the new companies coming to your town, which is all great news, but you've got this sort of lingering problem of, oh, well, what's, you know, how are these folks going to get around? Have you tried to get to the office park in Westborough from 495 at 8 o'clock in the morning? But those issues are really challenging for, well, for anybody to get done, but certainly for at a local municipal level, and even for a collection of municipalities working together. That's a really long-range project. But what we thought where we could have an impact, and what we're really interested in speaking with all of you about today, is the last mile opportunities and creating the partnerships that at least we think we're going to need to crack this nut, to get some of this work done, bringing together not only the state government and our municipal governments, but the business community, working in cooperation with the economic development committees, the economic development organizations like the 495 Partnership, and the chambers of commerce and those business organizations. And we've seen some great things happening on this front in places like Marlborough and Westboro. We've got an outstanding panel that you're going to hear about some of those projects. There's certainly a lot of work left to be done, but there is a silver lining because we're beginning to see how these things can happen and how they can work. So I want to turn this over, before I do, to the Lieutenant Governor. I want to thank our outstanding panel that we've got here today. I cannot wait to hear some of the information and ideas that they're going to share with us and how they've been having an impact in their communities and in the greater Boroughs Plus region on some of these last mile transit issues. We've got an outstanding moderator, Dr. Barry Bluestone, who is a champion of local economic development, Ed Carr from the Metro West RTA, Jim Robbins from the town of Westboro, Paul Matthews from the 495 Partnership, and representing the business community, Bill Spencer from Paul Life Sciences in Westboro, and Mary Beth Stewart from Wegmans Food Markets in Northborough, well, in a lot of places, but including Northborough and their regional office in Southborough. Now, this leads me to a very proud moment for us in this program. No one has been a greater champion of our region on economic development issues and on creating and generating partnerships between the Commonwealth and the business community than our Lieutenant Governor, Karen Polito. We've been so fortunate to have her from when she was in the State House fighting for our region, and now partnering up with Charlie Baker to have them fighting for us in Boston is truly outstanding, and we appreciate all the support that they give. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming the Lieutenant Governor.
So good morning, everyone. Let me just start by saying happy anniversary. Happy anniversary. Do you know what happened a year ago today? Raise your hand. How could we forget Scarred for Life? It was the beginning of Snowmageddon here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This was the day that first blizzard began, 26 to 36 inches, to be precise. And I did a little review of the weeks following that. There were 4 total storms. You remember the final one being on the Valentine's Day weekend. I felt so bad for the businesses that happened to them and to all of us. But so far so good, and here we are, well into 2016, our second year of our administration, and it's great to be here this morning to talk a little about some of the things that we did in our first year, and now some of the things that we're looking to focus on in the year ahead. This is very, very important, what you're doing today. And yes, I have been a local leader in this community, Shrewsbury, before coming into other political offices, and also serving in the House of Representatives. And I remember over this 20-year period of the importance of this region, but the importance of making sure that this region is known for its strengths, and that you are coming together community to community to really collaborate around making this a viable option and opportunity for businesses that are looking at the Commonwealth to locate, to grow a business, and to expand. So let's start with one of the things that we're focused on. Certainly, when we were campaigning for office, we talked a lot about building stronger communities. And the reason that's important is because a lot of what makes a person decide where to live is really all about what's strong in a community. And so the governor and I said, well, we've got a great state from one end to the other. There's no one-size silver bullet approach to this. It really has to be an approach that understands the whole landscape of our Commonwealth and how to look at each region, build on their strengths and the communities within. So the basic tenets of building a stronger community are all around, making sure we have great schools everywhere, jobs and opportunities for families to work at, to earn a good income for their families, and certainly a safe community in which people can live and work. And so when we came into office, we said, well, there has to be a really strong partnership. Communities cannot go this route alone. They need a strong state partner, a partner that's not handing out unfunded mandates left and right, but a partner that's really going to be that reliable, stable, predictable partner. So that meant first out of the box, we needed to signal to our cities and towns that we're going to provide you the necessary resources to do your job. Day one, Governor releases Chapter 90 funds, and for the municipal official types in the room, you know how important, Nath is nodding his head, how important it is to maintain your roads and your sidewalks and just the basic infrastructure. And since being in office, we've released over $300 million toward our road program across our Commonwealth. And for people like Wegmans and Paul and other businesses, they want to look at communities, and their employees are looking around at communities about how they maintain, what's the infrastructure like? Does this community really care about the basic little details that make a community strong? In addition to that, certainly to support local aid and school aid. We came into a deficit in our first 12 days of office, and we rebalanced a budget without compromising the aid and the promises to cities and towns. In our next budget, we increased local aid and school aid, and in the budget that we're filing momentarily, it's already printed, you will see continued increases in local and school aid. We promised to share our state revenue growth. If it's over 4%, then your revenue growth to local aid will be over 4%. And we've also added increases in our school aid by $72 million in this next budget. So those are the resources, making sure that you have what you need to succeed. The other piece of it is we want to prepare communities for success, prepare communities for the opportunities, which is exactly what you're talking about today. Collaborating, coming together as a region, but each community needs to do their part. So the very first executive order that Charlie signed a year ago with that Mass Municipal Association a year ago was around the Community Compact Program, and he's asked me to be the chair for all things municipal. So I say I have the very best job in state government because I travel all around the state and I get into city halls and town halls and municipal buildings, and I get to meet with local leaders and understand, what their vision is for the community and what they need as a state partner to help them succeed. So the Community Compact Program is a terrific program that's really taken off. Why? First of all, it's voluntary. Community chooses to want to be in a best practices program, chooses to raise the bar a little bit higher about how they can better serve their community. Second, it's funded. Thanks to our partners in the legislature, it's a funded program. And the third part of it is it's innovative. It's around solving municipal problems through best practices and having the state be a partner to help you succeed and achieve them. And I know Barry Bluestone, this is like music to your ears I'm going to call you a municipal geek because you love all these issues. And I'll give you one example. First of all, I've visited over 170 communities this past year. Today we're signing in Hopkinton the 120th Community Compact. So congratulations to Hopkinton today. And I want to highlight Keith Bergman's in the room from Littleton. Keith's raising his hand. So Keith, Littleton, and 7 communities within his area, including Littleton, your hometown, came together to form a regional compact, to form a TMA. It's called Crosstown Connect. And they have partnered through this Community Compact program together to figure out how they can move people around those 7 communities. Commuters, seniors, young people, how to solve that problem within their region. This is an opportunity for these boroughs as well to come together and think about a TMA for this area. The other reason why the compact program is important, yes, again, preparing communities for success, preparing local leaders for understanding how to attract developers and other types of opportunities to your community, but it also is an incentive program. You sign into the compact, you get bonus points, and those bonus points are calculated into our decision making around how to disperse the larger statewide grants that are available. So we want to reward good behavior, reward communities that are trying to do even better. So the programs like MassWorks, which is our mega infrastructure grant program, is a program that's available to these compact communities, and you get extra points for doing a better job. One additional announcement we made at MMA was using or incentivizing communities to use information technology to better serve the community. So we have a one-time $2 million competitive grant program available right now to the community compact communities that have signed into the program for IT grants up to $400,000. So I know, Arthur Vigent, you are a community compact community. You can apply for an IT grant to help you better solve a problem in your community. And Hopkinton, the same thing for you. So this is a program that's working, and communities should take advantage of it. Certainly, teamwork has been the hallmark of our success. The team that you're putting together will be the hallmark of your future success. You know, our partnership with the legislature, having a bipartisan cabinet of secretaries to really help us do our work, and then, of course, this strong partnership with our cities and towns is really how we will make a stronger Massachusetts from one end of the state to the other. The other part of it is we need to get our house in order too. And state government can be a more efficient and capable government. And so the very first opportunity we had was relative to budgeting, making sure that we're not spending beyond the revenue stream that's coming into place, and making sure that we're not relying on one-time revenue sources to balance the budget, and putting some monies into stabilization so that our bond rating agencies continue to see that we're making good decisions to balance our state budgets. Of course, let me just tick off a few things that we hit right out of the box. Certainly, fixing the T is an important issue to all of us. That crisis last year, that began a year ago today, gave us an opportunity to really dig into the operations of the T, form a fiscal management and control board, and really make sure that we can achieve reliable service for those that need to use the transit system in this Commonwealth. And more people need to do that. We have 1 million people that use the transit system. We have 3 million people that pay for it. It's $1 billion of your tax dollars that go into the transit system. It has to work. The other things that we're fixing is a health connector. When we came into office, we had over 500 calls a week from people that couldn't connect to health insurance. We've retooled the entire health connector tool, and we're down to minimal calls a week because it's now something that's working. Making the registry of motor vehicles far more customer friendly is also another opportunity that we saw this past year. You can go online, you can still go to AAA, but when you go into your local branch, you can complete a transaction now in under 30 minutes. That's all good news. Certainly what we're here to talk about today is building a stronger economy and looking at transportation as a key component of that. Relative to building a stronger economy, going back to my initial statement, it's really looking at each region and figuring out how to play to their strengths. So that's why we set up urban strategies, rural strategies, and suburban strategies. And I just want to call on Paul Matthews, who will be on your panel today, and thank him and the 495 Partnership for taking the lead in forming what's called the Suburban Edge Commission. Our administration came in, we saw that this commission was not fully appointed. We have now fully appointed members from this room, from this community, from this region to staff and serve as volunteers on this commission to really highlight what are the strengths of this area and how can we work as a partner, state and regionally, to help you further succeed. So strengthening municipalities, the compact program, finding these public-private partnerships, and investing in infrastructure. certainly Arthur Vision is a good example of the use of MassWorks. $2.7 million recently invested in your downtown, attracting a private housing developer and increasing density in your downtown area brings vibrancy to that community. Using the investment tax credits for sports toys to relocate their headquarters to Marlborough. Now that's a very interesting opportunity that you saw, and you were able to leverage state dollars to attract that headquarters here. Speaking about headquarters, we're all thrilled that GE decided, after 40 years calling Connecticut their home, will now call Boston, Massachusetts their new home. And GE is a mega corporation, okay? They can afford to be in the Seaport District in Boston, Massachusetts. But there are many other companies that want to be here in Massachusetts that perhaps cannot find a place that they can afford in Kendall Square or Boston. And therein lies the great opportunity for this area in our Commonwealth. So we want to make sure that we continue to tap into the innovation economy. We have a person directly responsible for innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Katie Stebbins is her name. We're focused on these sectors like a laser beam, digital healthcare being a perfect example. This eClinical was a longtime member of this community. We need more like that right here in this area. So you'll see a lot of partnership in that way, and we know we can do it together. A couple more things on that front. Regulations are a barrier to growth. One of the first things we did in our administration is conduct a full review. Hasn't been done in 20 years. We're looking at every single regulation. Regulations that affect municipalities, regulations that affect businesses, and we thank you for your input in peeling off the layers in terms of regulations that are not working to help you grow the economy. And we'll be issuing our full report on that in March. If you have any more ideas on that front, please send them our way. The final 2 points I want to make are relative to people and then on transportation. The workforce. People are our biggest asset here in our Commonwealth. Making sure that people have the right skills to match to the needs that our employers have across our Commonwealth. And in each region, employers have different requirements in terms of skills for the workforce that they need for their business. So when you think about workforce, you have to think about it as a continuum. It has to be a complete alignment from K through 12, vocational technical schools, community college, and higher education. And our administration is really dedicated to following that alignment through. That's why we put $5 million in place to help train employees to reach those employment opportunities, and we are ramping up a whole focus on vocational technical education. This is a real strength in our education system in Massachusetts, and in our next budget, capital budget, you will see over $80 million directed to equipment upgrades to help vocational technical schools expand and meet the needs of the employers in their region and make sure that we can match the graduates from their schools directly to employment or help them go on to higher education for even more advanced skills to really strengthen the workforce here in our Commonwealth so that we can continue to attract the GEs and the other companies that want to be here in Massachusetts. Finally, and I know the panel is going to talk about this today, is the issue of transportation. Yes, a lot of people live here in the Metro West central part of the state because you have a good quality of life. Back to what I was saying earlier, good schools, safe neighborhoods, good jobs, but hard for people to get around. So we must be far more innovative about how we help people go from one place to the other. I'm very pleased to say again that we are finally going to have, first time ever, non-stop service from Union Station in Worcester to Boston, and that's coming today. And adding express service to this line so that people can move from Grafton and Westboro in a more express fashion into Boston and home again. Certainly, the toll system coming down in October of this year, becoming a cashless system, will help relieve congestion and move more people through the Pike. And then making sure that when the bonds are retired for the Western Pike, that's west of 128, that we have the opportunity for future toll revenue to be used for infrastructure improvements on the 128 West Pike, including opportunities like at 90 and 495. That's a mega project, and we're going to need to be very strategic about how we approach it and have the revenue stream to pay for it. And then today, of course, you'll talk about the last mile, much like Keith Bergman did in Littleton. We have opportunities like TMAs to be available for this area. And then just totally focus on the conversations that we are engaging you in around our transportational capital improvement project. The capital conversations is a conversation that you can have online, feed into our online system so we hear exactly what this community wants us to help with. And then, of course, Focus 40. That is our administration's approach to really figuring out over the next 20 plus years how we are going to resolve and strengthen the transportation network, not only in Boston, but across our Commonwealth. That is very, very important. And finally, I will say, yes, I grew up here in Central Massachusetts. I'm a mom. I'm raising my children with my husband here. I believe in Central Massachusetts. I understand what the talent is, what the opportunities are, what the strengths are of this community. You will always have a strong voice in the administration through me and through my partners in our cabinet secretaries. And as I see this region's strengths, so we have strengths in other areas of the state that need to be amplified and supported. So today is a really great opportunity for you to look around this room, understand that you are partners, that there isn't competition between one town and another, that you really do need to collaborate and work together to strengthen this region, and know that you have a very strong and reliable partner here in state government. Thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to hearing you.
Well, thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor Polito, and certainly we appreciate the outstanding partnership that you and the Baker administration have shown to our region and to the business community. Let's keep things moving right along. As we do that, folks, I want to remind you, you are not prisoners in this room, so if you feel like you want to get up, stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee, please do. There's still plenty of things back there. But let's get started with the panel discussion. We have Dr. Barry Bluestone. Folks from the panel, please come on up. We have Dr. Barry Bluestone, who's going to moderate our discussion today, along with Ed Carr from the Metro West, RTA, Jim Robbins, town planner in the town of Westboro, Paul Matthews from the 495 Metro West Partnership, Bill Spencer from Paul Life Sciences, and Mary Beth Stewart from Wegmans Food Markets. So, Dr. Bluestone, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. David, thank you very much for inviting me back to Metro West. I must tell you, I give over 125 talks a year in my job. And I must admit, this is the first time in at least 10 years that I've been at a loss of words because of the spectacular remarks of our Lieutenant Governor. I want to thank you. I moved to Massachusetts in 1971. I came from the great city of Detroit, Michigan, where I grew up, having been born in Brooklyn, New York. Some of you know this story because I've seen many of you before in the work we've been doing at the Dukakis Center with many of your communities. But when I got here to Boston, I was really shocked because coming from Detroit, which at the time was the richest city in the world, it's not that today, Massachusetts was in a lot of trouble. In fact, the story I love to tell is when I arrived here in 1971 at the age of 26, to take a position as an assistant professor at Boston College and being paid the same as the priests, the difference being they actually do take vows of poverty. I had to find a place for my girlfriend and I to live, and I went to a real estate agent in Boston, had been recommended to me, and I said, look, I'm fresh out of college, I'm graduate school, I'm teaching here at Boston College. I'm making something like $11,200 a year as an assistant professor. I need a cheap place to live. And the real estate agent looked at me and he says, well, do you mind a high crime rate? And I said, well, I'm not really partial to homicide, but what do you have in mind? He says, well, no, the community I want to introduce you to has a very low homicide rate, but it has the highest burglary rate in the city of Boston. And so I moved into 379 Marlborough Street in Back Bay in 1971. And I could look up at the Hancock building going up, covered in plywood because all the windows had fallen out. That was Boston, 1971. That was Massachusetts. And we look around today and we see we have an unemployment rate of 4.7%. We've been creating jobs at a record rate for the entire country. As you all know, we just celebrated bringing GE here, one of the largest corporations in the entire world. And they came here not because of the tax breaks we gave them. They came here because of the talent and because large corporations want to be where the small, innovative firms are that are making the breakthroughs in technology. And GE is totally reinventing itself as a corporation. In fact, it's selling off its appliance division to a Chinese company, and it wants to be where we are already. We're very fortunate that we have communities all over Massachusetts who have been doing spectacular jobs in economic development. We've actually worked with almost all of Boroughs Plus communities in Metro West, particularly when we were working with the Metro West Chamber under Bonnie Diacchio, a wonderful friend of ours and a friend of yours. We've been looking at housing and how important housing is, particularly because that's one problem we really have to deal with across the Commonwealth, and particularly in the eastern part of Massachusetts. We've been looking at workforce development, and so we were thrilled when last Friday we released our latest report having to do with job openings through 2022 and the very important role of vocational education. We were thrilled to have the governor and 3 of his cabinet secretaries join him at the Boston Federal Reserve Bank to announce $80 million in additional funds for that. But we've also been looking at transit. The one battle I have with Karen Polito and Charlie Baker is they stole Stephanie Pollock from me, the Secretary of Transportation, who had been my associate director for 9 years. And in that time, I've had to learn very quickly since last February, as the Lieutenant Governor is going to be Lieutenant Governor, I've had to learn about transit. And so we've been doing a lot of transit projects you're going to be reading about them this spring, particularly how we fund transit, but also how we think about the role of transit and housing and all of our infrastructure. We've just started a new project with A Better City to look at the whole greater Boston area in terms of its full infrastructure, from highways to transit to energy, to water to sewer and energy. But today we're going to talk about transit, and we're going to be talking about transits in the Borough Plus 495 metro area. And the things that I want to ask our panel to respond to have to do with what I see as fundamental changes in the demography and the economy of Massachusetts, and particularly eastern Massachusetts. The first, of course, has to do with housing. We're going to see more and more young families looking to the Boroughs Plus as places to live because the cost of housing in central Boston, in Cambridge where I live, in Somerville, is just exploding. And with lots of college children, they're looking for communities like this. Number 2, we have been unbelievably good at attracting millennials to our Commonwealth. As late as a decade ago, we were losing 61,000 people a year who were leaving the state, and it was not sunbirds going to Florida, it was young millennials leaving the Commonwealth. We now have a net inflow, many of them coming as graduate students at Northeastern and deciding not to go back to Kansas, but to stay here. We have to house them, and we have to make sure they have transportation. But the other thing that's happening, and this is going to tie in with last mile, is that we have 2 huge changes in our demography. The first are the millennials. Now, just to give you one data point that I gave to the Boston Globe yesterday. In the cities of Boston, Somerville, and Cambridge, 34% of the population in 2000 were 20 to 34-year-olds. Between 2000 and 2010, 3/4 of the growth in population were 20 to 34-year-olds. And as they age and they leave college, they're looking to the Boroughs Plus as a place to live. But the other thing that's happening, even a more important demographic shift, is more people are looking like me, as I just turned 71 years old. And you have a community which is aging like every single city in town. And that means, what's the appropriate housing for them when they start to say, we want to downsize, but we want to stay in Westboro? Do we have the kind of housing, apartments, multifamily? Do we have the zoning that allows that? And the other thing, and I'm from Detroit, I'm an ex-auto worker. I built the first carburetors for the Mustang in 1964, so I love my car. But I must admit, 10 years from now, you do not want me driving a lot. I'm driving on an autonomous vehicle. But really, I'm going to need transportation that is good for me. I've been talking about Ubers for elders. When we think about last mile, last point I'll make before we turn to the panel, last mile is a great idea, but if you think about it, you're putting a lot of assets into moving people about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. What about all the rest of the day? Can you serve me when I want to go to Wegmans? Can you serve me when I need to go to the doctor? How can we build a transportation system that works for millennials, for workers, and for seniors that is appropriate for this region? Well, we have a wonderful panel to discuss these issues, and I'll raise some questions with them. We have Ed Carr, we have from Boston Scientific, Jim Robbins from Westboro, Bill Spencer from Paul Life Sciences, Mary Beth Stewart from Wegmans, and Paul Matthews from the 495 Partnership. So I'm just going to throw out some questions and let you take it from here, and I'm going to shut up and listen. So one is, how could we build last mile transit so that we could get our young workers and other workers to their jobs if they choose to use transit rather than spend all their time on the turnpike? How do we fund it? And is there a role for state government, local government, the RTAs, the business themselves? How do we have businesses collaborate? We can't expect a small firm with maybe 12 employees to set up their own shuttle. Is there a way for the RTAs, is there a way for Boroughs Plus to work together to get local employers to work as a team to provide such services? And what is the role of the RTAs? So there are a lot of questions here, and I'd like to turn to our panel, and maybe we can start with Ed.
Those are a lot of questions to answer.
I'm a professor.
One shot.
I ask questions and I let my students answer.
Well, I was hoping Paul would go first here to kind of tee up the ball, but suffice to say, about 10 years ago, the partnership and the Metro West Daily News did a survey of the whole Metro West area for the top 10 transportation nightmares. And at the time, this was 2004, 2005, the number one answer on the top transportation nightmares was lack of public transportation. There was none out here, except for a Natick neighborhood bus, and in Framingham they had a little lift system that operated not very well because there was no dedicated funding, there was no real organization to it. 10 years later, they did another survey last year, and public transportation was not the top one, it was number 3. Since then, we have come into existence. We've been in existence, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, for about 7 years, 8. We're in our 8th year. And what we have managed to do is start to grow transportation. And I'm the first one to admit that the public transportation system that we have in Metro West is just okay. It's not a good system, it's hardly a great system, but it's the bones of a system that's in here today. One of the things that we found out when we created the system was that we thought that everything was geared towards Boston. We thought, geez, you know, you have Route 9, you have the Mass Pike, you have the commuter rail, everything's going into Boston, that all the people in Metro West want to work in Boston. And that's not necessarily true. What we found out was when we created a line to connect with the Green Line in Boston, our Route 1, that the majority of the riders on that were reverse commuters coming out here to go to school, to go to work. So we knew that we had to change our thinking about how we provide transportation in the area, and which is, you know, a long way to lead up to the last mile piece of this. But not only with our Route 1, but in Natick, we've been extremely successful working with MathWorks on a last mile segment. That's one of our biggest routes is connecting with the commuter rail in Natick and providing MathWorks, the Soldier Systems Command, and others last mile transportation. We've just started to do that in Framingham too, and it grows every day. The third segment was our Southborough connection, and we were lucky enough 2 years ago to make a connection with the TMA, the 495 TMA, and Boston Scientific, although you did give me credit for working for Boston Scientific. I don't, I work with the RTA. We were able to create a partnership where we already had a shuttle service going to the city of Marlborough that went right down to City Hall, but what Boston Scientific wanted us to do was take that other incremental mile or so up there. So through negotiations, we were able to get them to pay for that small increment. And now, I believe that's, at least among my colleagues, that's the first public-private partnership in the shuttle business. And it's, you know, you build transit one rider at a time. And we're beginning to do that with Boston Scientific. There are some things we need to work out with, but I think that the numbers say that 60% of the people in Metro West work in Metro West. And I think we have to do a really better job of increasing the frequencies of what we have, the bones of our system right now. And the last mile stuff, that's good. That's good stuff, but it's ancillary to creating a better system with more frequency. While I have that, and I know I'm going on and on here, but while I have the floor here, I think that what the Boroughs Plus group should be focusing on is how do we create an infrastructure for public transportation 20 years from now. And here's why I say that. You have 495 that we're all paying attention to that's going to turn into 128 sooner rather than later if we don't take measures. And we have an opportunity now that Paul and his group has done that yeoman's work to pay attention to 495 and 90. There's opportunity there to create something like a bus rapid transit system with freight, not independent, but with freight. And what I mean by that is that if we had a dedicated lane that created bus rapid transit, which is, it's basically a train with no tracks, and used freight on that same thoroughfare to pay for it, that the rest of the maintenance of the rest of the highway would really go down. And you would, like for instance, Marlboro is a very difficult place to get to directly from Boston. And you know, we struggle with that. And Marlboro is probably the fastest growing of the boroughs, and but it's very difficult. You know, it's a long ride to get there from Boston. The way we do it, you know, come off a commuter rail and then take a shuttle and go up there. That's a long ride. But if you had a bus rapid transit system that went from Boston up to 495, you're there. You could do it in I dare say, you know, 3/4 of the time it takes now. So I think, Lieutenant Governor, if we're thinking 10 or 20 years out from now, we need to think about that bus rapid transit with freight on 495 and 90 to really serve the boroughs. The Regional Transit Authority does well at small stuff, but in order to really grow this area, and you know and I know that we're smack dab in the middle of the two largest cities in New England. Why wouldn't we want to put some money into infrastructure of this magnitude? I know we're all afraid to do big jobs like, because of the big dig. Everybody's like, geez, I don't want to get into anything big like that again because, there's a lot of demons out there that could get us. But this wouldn't be an expensive thing to do. We're just talking about taking roadway that we already have and putting Jersey barriers up and some signage and some expertise in handling that kind of traffic. I think it could be done at a
And let's follow up with that in a few minutes.
later on. I've set enough barriers.
And tell us a little bit about your views on the same issue.
Sure, and I think first off, to put Ed's comments in its proper context, I think, this goes right back to the point the Lieutenant Governor made about the public and private sectors working together. Look, the reason we're all here and looking out at this room, there's a whole wide range of constituencies here. But there's two things that are very clear to me. One, the public and private sector neither have the resources necessary to resolve this on their own. Two, we need to do it together. And to Ed's point, the partnership was very fortunate 10 years ago. Sometimes it's forgotten. And I know Dave did a very compelling job painting a picture of our needs out here. So we have a lot of needs. But let me just point out, 10 years ago, we didn't have Ed, we didn't have the RTA, and we didn't have the Westboro Shuttle. And I think to put this in some context, the reason we have the RTA is the partnership work with large companies, chambers of commerce, legislators like Karen Spoken, to go to community to convince them to establish the RTA. And visionary municipal leadership stepped up to the plate and founded the RTA one at a time. And then in turn, going from there, we need state support. The state's played a critical role. Large employers that come to the table to work with that. And we see it now in a different context here in Westboro. Your point on making sure it's not just serving commuters, you're absolutely correct, Barry. It has to serve residents as well as commuters. And what Ed can offer from the RTA perspective is a very visionary approach to working on councils of aging issues. So you're using rolling stock most effectively. And that way during the day, it's available for use of seniors, teens, and other people. And the Westboro Shuttle, which I think Jim will be talking about shortly, is a great example on a different scale of the public and private sector coming together. The Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, Jonathan Church is here, who played an instrumental role. When I think back at all the different routes Jonathan drew up, I think he spent a year drawing up different routes that meet different needs. And then working with Jim in the town of Westboro, Jim Malloy, Karen Chapman, Barbara Clifford from the Carter Night Chamber, and large employers, we're all able to pull together a route system which serves employers, and also, and I know from talking to Jim, his own hand was very instrumental in making sure that that shuttle also serves seniors and town residents. And I think that's a great example of another way that public, private, local, and state have to come together. And one last point before I pass the baton to Jim, and I'd like to amplify this later, but to Ed's point on a visionary approach, the Lieutenant Governor covered a lot of topics here, but one of the things the administration is just in the beginning stages of rolling out is an economic development strategy statewide, opportunities for all. I was very honored, along with some other people in this room, like Paul Joseph from the Metro West Chamber, to be on the advisory committee. And I really want to commend the administration, because this point we're making today, that transportation and economic development are intertwined, is absolutely an overt point of that plan. And it's the first time I've seen that reflected on the state level, that transportation and economic development are complement one another, intimately entwined.
If I could just add to that before we go to Jim, and following up on the Lieutenant Governor's last statement, it's economic development, it's transportation, and it's workforce development.
Oh, that's
and I'm thrilled to see the Cabinet, the Governor, and the Lieutenant Governor working on all three together. Jim, tell us
Thank
a little
you.
bit about.
That's a great segue.
I tried.
Thank you. I mean, you kind of handed me the baton.
I tried.
So we've gone from regional transit authority to a larger metropolitan commission that brings together and gives us, the local communities, an arena to discuss our commonalities, our common needs. As town planner, I review development proposals for a wide range of uses, residential, commercial, and all types of commercial, everything from retail to office to restaurant. And as a member of the Economic Development Commission, many years ago, we decided what we would do is find out what our local businesses really needed. And we decided to do that the old-fashioned way, by meeting with our businesses face-to-face, picking up the phone, making phone calls, scheduling visits where we could go and see their company and talk to them about what their needs were. And after doing that, with literally hundreds of businesses, we found commonalities and shared needs. And across the board, every one of those was talking about how are we going to get our customers, how are we going to get our workers, our employees, to work every day with other alternatives, because we talked about millennials, other than individual automobile. Because traffic congestion, particularly for Westboro, is a key problem, if I can put it that way, because getting off the 495 Route 9 interchange, depending on whether or not it's good weather or bad weather, can be quite an experience. Also, the 90 and 495 interchange, which is partly in our community, is also quite an adventure. So what's the alternative to that? It's better public transportation. We're a host community. We're an MBTA assessment community. And we have a train station. And the parking lot's filled every day with people that want to ride to Boston or Framingham or Worcester. But there are very few people coming off that train. So if you go to the train station prior to the Westboro shuttle, you'd see a lot of people waiting to get on, but very few people getting off because they can't finish the journey to work. That last mile is so key to helping our local employers grow in place and attracting new businesses to our town. So in cooperation with the WRTA, Worcester Regional Transit Authority, and Central Mass Regional Planning, and thank you, Jonathan, we were able to use our assessment to create the Westboro Shuttle a couple years ago. And what it was able to do is to meet the commuter that was getting off the train and to respond to the local employers by saying, we're going to provide a service now that's going to bring your local workers to work every day. So we now have a shuttle that meets the train 2 times in the morning, 1 time in the afternoon, and 3 times in the evening to finish that last mile to work. But as was pointed out earlier by Paul, we also have the use of that shuttle during the day, the off-peak hours, so that people can go to the library, they can go to the doctor's office, they can come to town hall, they can go to the coffee shop, they can do their grocery shopping. And even though the shuttle is primarily used by commuters, it is now becoming a popular means for high school students to go and have their afternoon caffeine fix. We actually see that the high school students are the largest riders. We have a stop during the day, at the end of the day, at the high school where they go down to Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, choose your local flavor. Also, lots of people ride to the library. I see it because my office is right next to the library. I see senior citizens get off to go to the library. So the shuttle's been very successful. We're averaging 500 riders per month, which is significant. And we're very grateful for this public-public partnership that's been developed.
Very good. Let's turn to our business community. Mary Beth, tell us about Wegmans and your transportation needs.
Okay.
Because I take it you both have customers who come to your store, but you also have lots of employees who work there.
Absolutely. So first, thank you for inviting me this morning. As you know, Wegmans opened its first store in Northborough back in October of 2011. Our store has about 550 employees, and obviously one of our biggest concerns is making sure we can staff our stores so that they can provide great customer service to you and also attract employees to our company so that they can be provided with career opportunities from both the store operations and culinary perspective. So getting folks to work is of utmost importance to me. Most of the employees that we have at our Northborough store are from the Metro West area because they are looking for employment close to where they live. We try to attract folks outside of this area, for example, from the Boston area. Great restaurants in Boston. We have great culinary opportunities. There are great schools that we try to recruit from. But when we attend job fairs and go and seek out employees, the first question we're typically asked is, is there transportation to get to your store? And when we say no, folks sometimes turn away from the table and don't even engage in conversation with us. So there's definitely a need. Wegmans is thrilled to be here. We're happy to be part of the community. We also want to be part of the solution because the solution is going to affect us as an employer. We have lots of opportunities for folks for employment, for career opportunities, and want to see how we can be part of the solution. One of the unique challenges we have with Wegmans is our hours of operation and employee scheduling, however. So the shuttle that might run and pick up folks, a couple times in the morning or a couple of times at night at the station might not be the best solution for us because our employees are working from 6 in the morning until midnight. So we do have, other things we need to take into consideration. We don't currently offer a shuttle for our employees. It's something that we've talked about. It's something that we've looked into. But again, I think that we're looking for a possible solution that's even bigger than just our company. There are a lot of retailers in the property where we have our store in Northborough. Maybe we have to have conversation and get together and collaborate. We're all facing the same challenge. We're all competing for the same talent. So how can we work together to come up with a solution to this problem? I don't know what it is. I'm glad to be here and engage in conversation to see where we can go with this. And but I do know that that's what we're facing right now.
Well, I'm certainly glad you brought up the idea of the shifts you have from 6 o'clock in the morning. Employees get here maybe earlier and at midnight and leaving after that. And that is a question. Now, let's talk with Bill Spencer. I just presume that at your company, people arrive at 9, they work for a couple hours, have lunch, and then they go home at 4, right?
That's not what they're going to tell you, but...
Oh.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate in this very important topic. Paul Life Science has 139 employees there. 80% of those people commute more than 25 miles to work every morning. And their hours vary. We are life science, so they're not so rigid always. But one thing I found very interesting is I invited Jim Robbins and Francisco Torres from the EDC, Westboro EDC, to come speak with our whole company about transportation. When we have 100% of our employee force commuting every day without a single person taking the transit system, I became quite concerned. This happened about 3 months ago, I took you over. We still don't have anybody on the commuting yet by public transportation. So those things cause me concerns. I moved here 3 years ago from the San Diego area, where I commuted about 22 miles one direction into work, and I took public transportation there because the coaster is what it's called there, offered solutions for people that wanted to work on the train. They had a shuttle system that took us to general business areas. And they did that every hour from 6:30 to 9:30 in the morning and 4:30 to 6:30 at night. Big loop. And I was at the Scripps Research Foundation at the time, and we had over 50% of our workforce there, research and development scientists, that traveled by the rail. So there's a big gap from what we have to what other communities have offered and the solutions that they have. So the solutions are there. It's how do we pay for it? Now, as a private company, we certainly don't want to have the full burden. We really would like to share that with the municipalities and so forth. So how do you bring us together with other companies, I think is where the real question is. Is that through our economic development committees? I believe so. But you really need to get to the table to start the discussion.
Very good. I was thinking, as all of you were speaking, about how I use transit. So as it turns out, I have a much easier commute because I live in Cambridge, near Harvard Square, and I work at Northeastern University, right in basically the middle of Boston. And when I think about my own transit, I realize I use all forms of transit. I usually actually drive to work because I have a parking space, and it takes me about 20 minutes. And I'm usually carrying things with me. Once I'm there, it's seldom that I use the car unless I'm coming out to one of the communities here. I have the Orange Line, literally 50 yards from my office, which takes me downtown. I can transfer onto the Red Line that gets me to Boston Fed, where I do a lot of work. I also use taxis, and I use Uber. And I'm constantly looking for that mix of transportation, quite frankly, that minimizes my transit time. I'm busy. I do a lot of things. And to just spend a lot of time in transit, either getting to work, coming from work, or going off campus for all the things we do. And I'm sure you have employees who actually leave during the day to see other firms or to work with other partners in the life sciences. That becomes really important. So really, you have the question of how you make the transportation more seamless for people, whatever their schedule is or whatever their needs are. And I think that's really critical. One last thing before I turn back to the panel with some questions, particularly about funding, is I mentioned seniors. And last month or 2 months ago, my dear friend Seti Warren, who's the mayor of Newton, Massachusetts, he's been doing a lot of work in Newton, and he happens to be the current chair of the Community Development Committee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And he had a conference here in the Boston area at Boston College, where he brought mayors from around the country to talk about issues of transportation, of housing, and so forth. And one of the things I did is I turned to the panel and I said, well, look, I mentioned that I'm 71 years old. I'm looking for other things besides my personal automobile. What I really like to see is Ubers for silvers, or old people, right, or old people. And it turns out that Atlanta has it. They have an Uber Silver, which is a service that's available to anyone over 65. And if you cannot afford it, it's free. The business community is paying for that service for those in low income. The only thing that is true, as he pointed out, is that if you have a special card, which allows you to use Uber Silvers for free, is that the driver at the end will turn and give you a card which says your ride has been the compliments of such and such a firm with an advertisement. And I pointed out that this is really going to work for firms that, for instance, market Viagra, and other products like that for that community. Last thing, before we turn, because I think Bill brought up the real tough question: how do you fund it? If you're really going to have seamless transportation for residents, for commuters, we have to find a way to fund it. We are at the Dukakis Center, funded by the Barr Foundation, doing a major new study on transit funding. And one of the very first things we did was to turn to the Secretary of Transportation and get all the data we could get from DOT on both capital and operating expenses. Turns out they're just finally figuring out what their budget is and where their money comes from. We've working with them and we've tried to figure it out. And this may surprise you, but if you exclude federal funding, which we should, auto drivers and truck drivers are actually being subsidized in the state. They pay, we pay, those of us who drive, those of us who are truckers, pay about $1.2 billion a year in gasoline taxes, tolls, and registration fees, and so forth. But we spend about $1.6 billion on our transit system, on our transportation system, on our highway system. $1.6 billion per year on our highway system each year, excluding federal funding, which means that those who aren't drivers are spending about $400 million on the highways. Okay? The second thing is that we're going to point out that in fact, every time we get somebody off the highway and into public transit, we make drivers happier. Because if we could reduce the commute times, and when I come out like today, and I'm going west and I'm looking at all those people on the pike coming in at 14 miles an hour from past Framingham, if we could get them from 14 miles an hour to, let's say, close to the speed limit, think of how many hours a week that would save them for spend with their families or so forth. So one of the things that we're going to be actually arguing for in this report that will come out in April is we need to raise the gasoline tax, we need to raise tolls, and we can do electronic tolling on north. You know, you pay it going east-west if you're on the pike, but people are going north-south, get a free ride. You should have those tolls. And ultimately, as cars become more fuel efficient, we probably have to move away from gasoline taxes to what are called VMTs, vehicle miles traveled. But I think we can make an argument that the cross-subsidy toward drivers, and I'm one of them, like many of you, and the cross-subsidy now coming to drivers, if we were to reverse that and cross-subsidize public transit workers, public transit drivers, we would find ways of funding all of these programs, make driving more efficient and more convenient, and solve that problem. But, last point, it's very difficult to pass any of that today. The legislature is nervous about raising taxes on gasoline by even 9 cents last year, right? And the reason for that is they think that drivers are going to rebel. We have to make the argument that providing this kind of transit and making it work for everyone in the Commonwealth is actually going to be to the benefit of drivers, and therefore make the case that they have to pay a larger share of the transit dollar.
If I could, Barry, number one, I want to commend you and thank you. That quote you had about east-west versus north-south, I urge you to put that in bold in the report.
We will.
I think you are talking to a room full of people who are well aware that a peculiarity of the Massachusetts transportation system is that those of us who live here and travel to Boston, vice versa, are paying for the privilege of doing so. And in fact, have been paying for the privilege of upgrading the north-south transportation infrastructure, which makes this discussion all the more complicated because you have a historical issue out here where, frankly, our toll money has gone towards north-south infrastructure, not east-west. So a couple reactions and thoughts. One is the Turnpike is currently engaged in its triennial. Every 3 years it reviews the Western Turnpike operations. In this case, for those of us who live in central Massachusetts, we are in fact part of western Massachusetts. According to the designation, it's west of 128. So there are hearings going on. The next one is in Framingham tomorrow night. Or
Tonight.
Excuse me. I'm already confused. In fact, it's Tuesday, so it's tonight. But it's very important to the point that the region gets out and talks about these issues. I think secondly, the driver in transit equation is more complicated in this region by virtue of the fact that we have the youngest RTA in this region. And there's an article in your package that ran in Commonwealth Magazine with a lot of very compelling quotes from Ed about the fact that the Metro West RTA is the youngest RTA. It's done a tremendous job maturing under Ed's leadership, taking it, when I think about where he has it now versus how we sold it as a concept 10 years ago, I would not have believed the service we have now. It far exceeds my original dreams, frankly. That being said, it speaks to the fact that the RTAs around the state are not funded as robustly as they need, yet the public dialogue around the driver versus transit frequently figures into transit enhancements and investments happening in the bus and subway system centered around Boston, which I understand there's a need for, but there also is a need for equity in the application of those funds so that those regions out here contributing in a lot of ways, not just toll money, but also our sales tax, can benefit from the investment back. Because when I grew up in Worcester, right to your point, growing up in Detroit, times changed. Detroit's very different, Worcester is very different. When I grew up in Worcester, it was an employment magnet. A lot of people who lived out here went to work in Worcester. Now, frankly, I'm the perfect example. People live in Worcester and come to work here. And the transit mode needs to shift accordingly. It needs to not just be geared to getting people into Boston, but also getting people who are now more interested in urban living in Boston later in their careers back out here. And we see it from our employers. They constantly are talking about the need to synchronize the commuter rail schedule. And another opportunity going on right now is the MBTA is engaged in, I believe the soundbite is the first time since the Eisenhower administration, revamping the commuter rail schedule based on need. And Keith did a compelling job up in Littleton, propelling some changes that are still pending into that schedule to help companies like IBM and Cisco. But I think it's vitally important to those of us in the private sector hearing your concerns on scheduling. I think it's hard for employers to track these things, but that's why there's chambers of commerce, groups like the partnership, the Boroughs Plus conversation, to highlight the opportunity to say to the state, here's our scheduling needs. Can you please accommodate that? And the state has the enforcement task to try to do that. But it's incumbent upon all of us to provide input. And although we're slipping out the back, I want to offer thanks to Representative Chris Walsh and Representative Kane, who are both here from the state level, demonstrating the legislators are just as engaged in this conversation as all of you.
While they are here, before they slip out the door, I want to try a poll. How many of you got to this meeting by a private automobile? Okay. I just came by a gas station here, and the gas is, as of this morning, $1.83.9. Okay. I remember when it was 4.06. If we could guarantee you that an additional gasoline tax of, let's say, 10 cents a gallon would be used for truly improving the highway systems, reducing congestion, and helping to subsidize the RTAs and public transit, how many of you would be willing to spend 10 cents more a gallon? Almost all of you. We have to communicate that to these guys, because you'll tell us how difficult it has been to deal with the question of how we finance our highways. And I think we're beginning to change that conversation in the Commonwealth with the benefit of lower priced gasoline, so that we may be able to get more of the revenue, and then we have to make sure that some of that additional revenue is going to the RTAs throughout the state and not just to Boston and the MBTA in Greater Boston. I commend this poll to you and your fellows. Please give my best to the speaker. So, tell me more about how you would fund and how you think there should be a mix between auto drivers, transit users, businesses, and the government, state and local, in funding this future transportation, which I think everyone in the room knows is so critical. Thoughts? Ed?
One thing that we should know out here too is particularly about RTA funding, as compared with MBTA funding. The RTAs are funded, or this RTA is funded 50-50 local aid, local assessment, as well as state contract assistance. There is some federal funds involved, some revenue from Farebox and this and that, but we as communities fund 50% of the net cost of service out here. Where in Boston, the MBTA, that's not the case. They get money from the
And that
sales
50% I
tax.
take it is mainly coming out of property taxes.
No, it comes out of local aid.
Local aid, okay.
Unlike, but it's still money. It's still money that the communities can use for hiring teachers or this and that. So that's lost, I think, on a lot of the funders of the regional transit authorities over here. And I think there's definitely an inequity in the system. But, I agree with everything you said, Barry, earlier on about the vehicle miles traveled, the gas tax, what Paul said about, the east-west is paying the freight here, north-south is paying nothing. If we had something that was more equitable in the whole Commonwealth, it wouldn't really be a lot of money. And if you bought into my idea about bus rapid transit, you would ultimately save a lot of money on repairs on the highway. If you talk to anybody from Mass Highway, they'll tell you it's the freight trucks that rip up the highway. That's where the cost comes from. But if you could put them in one lane with the bus rapid transit, as I said, you would minimize your costs and save some money. But again, I don't think it would be onerous to fund this system if it were more equitable. And as Paul pointed out, we out here, because we're in the Commonwealth, we're a rich area as compared to the northern tier, the southeast, or even western, real rural Western Mass. I mean, this is where the money is in Metro West. And I think they're taking advantage of us, frankly.
Other thoughts about funding? Want to add to it, Paul?
Okay, thanks, Paul. I actually kind of want to make a comment and then ask a question for the fellow panelists here. I think that there are creative ways that come to the fore when businesses talk to each other and when businesses talk to local government. Some of the things that I've heard when reaching out to local businesses are that within an office park, there are businesses that share needs. It could be the hours of their employees. It could be the point of origin of their employees, because businesses know the zip codes from where their employees originate. They know what directions they're coming from to work. There could be opportunities for businesses together to sponsor a shuttle to come to the local train station, the local MBTA station. And I'd like to hear from Mary Beth and from Bill and anyone else on the panel, any experiences that would support that point of view.
Bill, you're okay?
The reason I'm here is because I have engaged with the city to find these opportunities. That's how I became a member of our planning board in town. That's why I started going to the Economic Development Committee meetings, first Tuesday of every month. Was to meet other various business owners and in commissions that could help us out and fight and try to get better equity out of our area. And so the challenge is people finding time to do that. And a lot of our larger companies in town these people necessarily don't live from Westboro, but I do, so it's easy for me to engage that way. But having a forum once a month for business owners and a panel discussion potentially, or at least a list of questions and moderation might be a good way to start. I think certainly people from my company would attend. That would be one way to go. The shared expenses for commuting from the rail station, I think is feasible. Certainly, larger companies would be able to foot the bill for insurance and upkeep on shuttles. As a matter of fact, one of our facility in New York has 3 shuttles there. They go to the various Long Island rail stations, and we bring people in. But there we have about 30% of people who are commuting by public transportation.
Well, you're good.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's unrealistic to ask employers to have some skin in the game. I know that when we lose an employee at Wegmans, the cost to us is $7,000 when you take into consideration the cost of recruitment, onboarding, training, getting someone up to speed. That's what we've calculated to be our cost for turnover, so that's pretty considerable. So I don't know what the funding would look like. It would be shared by employers based on usage, but I think it would be, a good start at least to get employers together that have common needs and common concerns, like the flexible scheduling that we have at Wegmans, to try to come up with a solution, perhaps geographically. There's a lot of retailers on the hill where our store is in Northborough, and I'm sure we're all facing the same challenges. As I mentioned earlier, we're all competing with the same, for the same talent, so we need to try to collaborate to come up with a solution.
And I was just going to add, I think that the common perception of public-private partnerships is that there's large private sector companies who can heavily subsidize service, right? That's the holy grail. I think that's terrific for companies of a significant size, and to the point that is made like in the Bay Area, although I've never worked out there, we were part of a conference back in November where Google's transportation director talked about what they do. I mean, let's be honest, a company the scale and size of Google has resources available to it that I can't even dream of. However, so our nonprofit, which is myself and Jessica, is across the street. And we're in a building owned by Fruit Capital. It's a typical, Class A office space in this region, heavily made up with small companies and nonprofits in the building. I'm sure not one of them could subsidize the service. Yet Caruth, as the landowner, does a terrific job at publicizing the Westboro shuttle. There are materials available, posters as you come in, illustrating the shuttle that I believe Jonathan and CMRPC pulled together, where you can literally scan the shuttle on your smartphone, to get the schedule. And I know from talking to Caruth, as they bring tenants through the building, that's an amenity they're not only offering and talking about, but in many cases, the smaller companies coming in are actively asking, how would I get people here? So I think that the public-private partnership speaks a lot of form. I think it would be ideal if there was a financial element, but I think just as important, look, these services don't succeed without offering enough length of service to provide reassurance to people, particularly, like I'm a parent with 2 kids. I want to know what's going to be there. If I ride it in, I need to know I can get it out.
Or
To
if you have
get
an
my
emergency, you have
Yeah.
some way to get home.
Correct, correct. And that's vitally important to these services. So the idea of partnering in a public-private partnership over marketing the service, I think is just as important as the finances.
Ed, the last word before we turn to questions and answers from our.
This is just for Bill and Mary Beth. You know, one option that's missed, I think, is the option of hiring disabled people. We actually, half of my budget, half is spent on providing transportation for elderly and disabled. Half. So the fixed route system that you see out there is only half funded, where I provide transportation for over 100,000 elderly and disabled people. Now those are people that could get to work because by law, the ADA law requires me to provide that transportation. There's an untapped resource, and I sit on the board of the Center for Independent Living, where we deal with the fact that 70%, 70, of disabled people are unemployed, as compared to the 4.5 where we're dealing with regular people out here. I think that, you know, these are people that already have transportation and could find transportation to work if they were, you know, if the business communities reached out to this segment, just as an alternative.
Terrific. I have applications in my car.
Call the center, I'll give you the number afterwards.
Very good. Now it's your turn. We have about 20 minutes for questions before we close this session. I think you've had a wonderful, rich panel of suggestions and ideas about a critical issue. Let's start over here. Tell us who you are.
My name is Arthur Bergeron. I live in Marlborough. I was involved with the Economic Development Corporation in Marlborough. So I had a comment and a question.
Can everybody hear?
Can you hear me?
Fine, we don't need mics.
I have a comment and a question. The comment. I would bet that the reason why you use your car to drive from Harvard Square to Northeastern is because that's how the Boston transportation system is set up. That's the fastest way to go. Because otherwise you're stuck with point to point. And point to point is you got to go into the city and you got to go out to Northeastern. We'll amplify that times 100 and that's us, right?
Yeah.
There is no point to point, right? There's no point. There isn't. So
what's your point?
So which gets to the related question. But going back to your original comments, I've kept trying to think of the same issue about, so how do we get the shuttle that goes from the Southborough station into Marlborough? Or how do we get the bus that's now running from Boston Scientific, from Cambridge into Boston Scientific to now go to the industrial park? And every time you do that, the clock's ticking and the commute's getting longer, right? I'd like you to go back to your Uber suggestion. I found myself saying, so what about if instead of doing that, right, you're really funding Uber? And you're saying, okay, the last mile is not going to be on the highway, it's going to be from the Southborough train station to our industrial parks. So don't we want to have a bunch of Uber guys, when the train arrives, getting people to where they need to go, as opposed to wasting our time trying to figure out this ideal bus shuttle that we'll never be able to figure out because it's not point to point.
Wow.
That's my question.
Big question.
Well, I would offer, so I'm on the board of Tea for Massachusetts, which is very engaged right now in a conversation about what is happening. We're calling it transformative mobility, right? You look at some of these new models, everything from autonomous vehicles to shared services like Uber and Lyft, to new technologies and like apps on your phone. So how is this going to change our transportation system moving forward? And more importantly, what do our state and communities need to do to keep pace? And I think there's tremendous potential with some of these shared services in talking to national experts on how it can help resolve suburban transit issues with RTAs like Ed's, or working in concert with shuttles like the Westboro Shuttle. That being said, I think one thing's clear. There's not going to be one solution to this particular problem. I think, Arthur, you're absolutely right. I think that's going to be part of the solution over time. I think what we're seeing right now is Uber, Lyft, and shared services arrive at the splash, sort of the urban center in Boston, and it's now spilling out. And I know people who are using Uber and Lyft in the boroughs here over the holidays to get around, which I think it's going to become more and more prevalent. I think we're going to see a conversation on the legislature, on the state, on how to marry these things. And it's going to require innovative thinkers. And in case it was not abundantly clear by Ed's point in marrying freight and bus rapid transit, he's clearly an innovative thinker. And it's going to require people like Ed, who are ahead of the curve, to figure out how to make these things work. But I do think there is going to be an emphatic need for services like the RTA and like the Westbrook Shuttle to work with larger employers and fill in the gaps in between. Like Uber's never going to fill everything. The shuttle will never fill everything. The RTA and the MBTA will never fill everything. It remains for everyone to operate here.
I certainly appreciate that question because I think we should be broadening our ideas about how we're going to do transportation. I was surprised yesterday. I was listening to On Point with Tom Ashbrook and Jane Clayson, and they're talking about autonomous vehicles, and they had the vice president for innovation design at the company I used to work with, Ford. And they made an announcement yesterday that the first commercially available passenger autonomous vehicle will be offered by Ford 4 years from now. I thought this was 10, 15 years in the future. It's coming faster than any one of us could think. That's going to play a role as well, particularly for seniors. And we'll have to put that into our equation as well. Any other responses to this question here? Ed?
Arthur, you're absolutely right. But the question is, where's that point going to be? If you cut off the point at the Southborough train station, say you want to create Ubers from there out to the boroughs, you're talking about a wide expanse. You need to connect the dots closer for people, say, coming from Boston or wherever to get there. Uber is definitely a part of the solution. There is no question about that. It's already proven itself in Boston. But there is a place, as I think as Paul pointed out, for everything. There is a place for shuttles. There is a place for commuter rail. There is a place for bus rapid transit. There's a place for everything. It's just gotta work as a clock works. They're all different pieces to it.
I mean, one way to think about it is the physical asset. A 44-seat passenger bus, a 9-seat van, a 1 or 2-seat Uber, and when you start thinking of those,
And a 1-seat rickshaw.
a 1-seat rickshaw and a 1-seat bicycle, you start thinking about a real transportation.
Right.
The second question, over here.
I'm curious if there's...
Now, who are you?
Jim Wall, Economic Development Committee here in Westboro, and resident here. Is there the opportunity to create a portal at the state level or with the transit authorities where the businesses could indeed upload this data on their employees so you'd have a better clarity of where are people coming and going from? And as you start to see concentrations at certain levels, you can say, here's the solution for this point to point, and here's the solution from this point to point. If you have that data, but there's a place that they can bring that data to and refresh it on a regular basis.
Terrific idea. And we have all the GIS, graphical information systems, where we could actually, if we had those data, could produce those maps, and you're going to see clusters here and here, and you can see where they're going from point to point, and then that says 44, 9, 2, or rickshaw, right? Right. Fabulous, fabulous. And that's the way businesses and the RTAs and the 495 Coalition work together to collect those data. We need to know where people live. We need to know what their current transit is. We need to know where they have to go. And we could map that all out, and that would give us the kind of information about what we need in a transit system, right?
Can I just respond to that? I think that's a really good point, Jim. We do have that kind of data. And I think providing that data to an audience, even in the private sector, would possibly generate interest of a business to fill that gap. We're talking about Uber, Arthur's example of Uber. We know the Southborough shuttle many years ago failed because the route was too long. We didn't have any short stopgap transportation for like the shuttle we have in Westboro now. It could be that private company is going to see that need when the data is available to show that there's a demand, that would fill that gap. So that's a really good point.
I think if I could add to that, the large employers in the state, typically under DP ride shares, have to report information like that to the state. But to your point, I'm not aware of a voluntary type portal for smaller employers who aren't triggered by that DEP standard. And moreover, the idea of communicating that data back to Ed and the other RTAs, I think is still a gap, correct?
The state right now is working on what they're calling an MPO commission. And that MPO commission is taking a hard look at the metropolitan planning organizations throughout the Commonwealth and seeing what they can do to improve how they use all this data to better serve the communities out here, and more importantly, put federal funds where they need to go. Jessica testified at the last hearing and came up with a brilliant solution on behalf of the partnership to include the private sector in on this MPO process, where they're not involved on it. It's usually town officials, municipal officials, and state and these planning people, but including the private sector in on the metropolitan planning organization, I think is a brilliant thought, and I think that we as folks that want to get a better bang for our buck should be looking at that perspective.
Good. Question over here.
Keith Bergman, Town Administrator in Littleton, and we've been talking about RTAs, Regional Transit Authorities. I want to make sure that we mention TMAs, Transportation Management Associations. Crosstown Connect is one. There are a lot of them in the Commonwealth. They are mostly businesses. Our particular model is a combination of municipalities and businesses working together. We were one of the regional community compact groups that the Lieutenant Governor spoke of, where not only are we getting funding from the state, more importantly, we are getting the assistance and the intervention, if you will, from Mass DOT to help us on critical issues. They've agreed to convene the two regional transit authorities that are in our area and help us think through and make smart decisions about reverse commute, last mile, first mile, because we can't do that on our own as a community. There are so many moving parts. We have to have some help together. So I would just commend the notion that if you can put together a place where you can make smart decisions for the businesses, for the communities, for the regional transit authorities, that's a key. And that for us, it's going to be all of the above for transportation solutions. The last mile, it might be a shuttle, a fixed route shuttle that connects my commuter rail station in Littleton with IBM or with Cisco Systems or with Devons or Red Hat. But it might just as well be Uber or Lyft throughout the day. It might be a bus shuttle that goes from Westford to Alewife, because that is serving some other need. It's a combination of things, but getting everyone together is, I think, the critical part.
Thank you. Over here.
Okay, so I am, my name is Kate McAvoy-Johnsick. I work at Harvard Pilgrim. I recently joined the board of the 495 Partnership. I'm a west of 128 patriot. I think that's probably the most delicate way to say it, and suffer a little bit from these, from the feelings of taxation without representation in two particular areas, media and transportation. Media, every other city of our size has its own media market. We don't, because of proximity to Boston, and unless there's a water main break or a murder or snowstorm, we don't technically get good coverage, and it limits our marketplace's ability to have the same economies that others of our size might. But where it really, really sort of, frosts my cookies is when we start talking about the transportation, because Paul had that 100% right. We have been paying for north-south infrastructure upgrade. The big dig, pull the whole project apart. It was about north-south 93 infrastructure upgrade that is borne by, us poor, chuckleheads that go east to west and west to east. So I do think we have to fix that. I'd be interested on the political will, your thoughts about, is there political will to do it? How would we do it? And then even if we aren't going to abolish the fee for the ride, can we make sure that those dollars come to west of 28, again, to work on initiatives like last mile and other integrated initiatives that will help our communities become even more of a better choice for companies and individuals as they look to send here, personally and professionally.
Let me just deal with the technical issue. That we're going to be, as the Lieutenant Governor told us, eliminating the regular toll booths
Yes.
in October. We now have electronic tolling technology that allows us to toll any highway without disrupting traffic. And I think that solves a technical problem. You've asked a political issue, you know. A lot of people living north and south from Marblehead down to Brockton, down to Duxbury, have benefited from what you are helping subsidize. How do you build a coalition that says it's time you paid your fair share?
I guess I will first volunteer that, one, I'm happy to have Kate join our board. Two, I think that's a good.
She's going to frost your cookies.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to have board members who ask legitimate, hard questions, and this is a legitimate, hard question. And incidentally, it's not just for everyone up here on this dais, including you, Barry, with your report, which I think will heavily influence the public dialogue among policymakers. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ask these questions outward, not just to our champions like the Lieutenant Governor, like Representative Walsh, like Representative Kane, but legislative leadership within 128. And I think to that end, I authored a piece in Mass Benchmarks about 2 months ago. They talked about the need, when you look at transportation infrastructure, Site Selection Magazine, Economic Development Magazine, both picked it as their #1 factor in locating companies in 2014. It is a huge factor in how companies make location decisions. It's an economic issue. And as I said, it's reflected in this administration's economic development plan. But while we're having a very upfront, honest dialogue over needed reforms and management reforms led by your former associate, Secretary Pollock, we need to have the associated honest dialogue about resources, where resources are coming from, where they're going. And we need to have visionary conversations, to Ed's point, about bus rapid transit. There is a robust conversation on bus rapid transit in Boston, yet there's no recognition being given of the potential of bus rapid transit in a suburban setting. Or in highway planning, to Ed's point, set aside an easement, so 20 years from now we can utilize that. But be visionary about it. And we need to have, I recognize there's a lot going on right now, and the media is very focused on the immediate day-to-day reforms of the city. But Secretary Pollock is very engaged in this NPO commission, to the Project Selection Advisory Committee, which my colleague Jessica is on an advisory role on selecting how projects are going to be funded based on objective criteria. And we need to have this corresponding honest dialogue on where the money's coming from, where the money's going, and how can we establish a funding needs that's honest and speaks to our needs and that's fair.
Very good. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions over here.
Representative Hannah Kane, and I just wanted to echo a couple of comments that Paul just said. We're very blessed to have Lieutenant Governor of Central Massachusetts. Secretary Pollock has been wonderful. Representative Walsh and myself, along with Representative Moraney from Grafton, and Representative Dan Donahue from Worcester, we all sit on the Joint Committee on Transportation, which is also very helpful in terms of representation from this area. But there is still a lag in terms of perception of our region that perpetuates the State House. And so, one of the things, and it's very small, it's very silly, but it irks me to no end that the Western Turnpike starts at Weston. And that is the language that is in the legislation from what it was, and that is something that it has continued to be called. And as we're going out with a triennial review, I've spoken to the folks at MassDOT about, if you really want to help engage in the conversation and change people's mindsets about what happens outside of 128, we need to appropriately name something such as the Western Turnpike, because there's a whole host of people that see something coming up for review on the Western Turnpike and they pay no attention to it because they think it doesn't affect them. And those are a lot of our constituents as well. So I was very pleased when Jessica's email came out from the partnership the other day, indicating that the Western Turnpike does in fact start in Weston. But I do think that we've been very fortunate to have some very strong voices when there are transportation issues that come up. But there's still voices that are, I would say, isolated in terms of when they come forward. So it isn't simply enough to have the 495 partnership come in and testify on something. We need to see the business community. We need to see other town managers, other planners coming in and also speaking to transportation issues. Because it is very much still a world which is very much centralized on the area immediately around the State House. So I would just encourage all of you, it is fantastic to come here today, and you're very fortunate to have strong people who represent the area and speak highly of it, and some other groups. But you need to also make that commitment when you see something, and the partnership's very good about letting us know about those opportunities as well, to come in and really talk about this region and why transportation is so critical for us, because, and especially the private entities as well. And this is a good opportunity with the economic development report coming out and the workforce development issues that we're talking about to really make that myriad of those three issues something that is very present in legislators' minds in Boston as we make decisions on where we're funding. And one last point I would make is the legislature actually did vote to increase the gas tax. It was the voters who then repealed it. And I think what was central to that issue was the notion that it was going to, in perpetuity, increase without sort of any ongoing insight and decision-making on how those dollars are going to be spent. And it is very, there's a long history of dollars being raised and then going into the general fund and not going to what they were intended for. So I think the responsibility on us is making sure that people really truly understand what am I being asked to pay for, not just an increase in the gas tax, but I'm being asked to pay for, you know, a rapid bus route, a dedicated lane for freight, and why that matters. And I think there's a more successful outcome the more specific we are with people on what we're asking them to pay for.
Thank you
all
so
for being
much.
here.
Wonderful. Over here.
My name is Stephanie Hirschon. I'm the Executive Director of the Metro West 495 Transportation Management Association. So this is the TMA that directly serves this region. And I'm very encouraged with the gathering today. I think that the mindset over the last 15 years has really evolved with the communities coming forth and saying, you know, we really need to have transportation really number one on our economic development plans. And the TMA is very good at, you know, getting in the trenches with the employers of the region to really look and see, you know, what's the ultimate goal here? It's to attract and retain talent, as some of the panelists were talking about, and for the communities to attract and retain business. And so the TMA is very good to, you know, working with those groups to get them together to really maximize that private-public partnership, not necessarily in all things money, but in other ways too. So, you know, these types of panels and discussions are very important for the region.
Thank you. One last question. Let's go over there.
So Paul Joseph with the Metro West Chamber of Commerce. You mentioned Bonnie, my predecessor, so it's a great opportunity to be here. Thank you to the panelists. One question actually goes to Rep. Kane's comment about the economic development plan that Paula mentioned you participated in. Our big problem, one of our big problems, is we are subsumed into Greater Boston or Greater Worcester on that plan. The Lieutenant Governor herself referred to urban, suburban, and rural regions. Well, if we are subsumed into two urban regions, we're not even regarded in this planning process as Metro West, as a unified, greater good combination of suburban communities that are doing great by themselves. So when you start thinking about suburban commission is a great step, where we have the elements of it, but we still lack that recognition as much as the current administration and past administrations acknowledge there is a Metro West. We're not a player at the table, if you will, in terms of thinking about planning. The numbers Dave McKay put up at the beginning, at 56 some odd thousand employees in the Boroughs Plus piece of Metro West, and when you expand that out to Framingham and beyond, it more than doubles. So if we're thinking about all of these things in an integrated way, and yet we're promoting an economic development plan that doesn't even define that, to me, it's a frustration, because we can have these conversations to a point, but we need to start thinking holistically. One of the things that did come up in our discussions with transit is this notion of using what we've got. You know, and in long term, it's going to take how long for 495 and 90 to actually come to fruition from just pure construction, right? We have thoroughfares through rail lines. We can use existing rail corridors. We can use utility corridors to allow the MWRTAs. I'm from Natick. I was a one-term selectman, 6 years economic development chair of that. And the idea of using some of these corridors for the buses, for the electric vehicles, for these autonomous vehicles. The problem with Lyft and Uber and all these other solutions is we're still putting vehicles on our local congested roads. So we have to think creatively, we have to think in an integrated way. I'd love feedback from a planning perspective. You know, when you start looking at what are the thoroughfares that are already built, put a bus next to rail, put a bus next to bike trails, put smaller electric vehicles next to those. And to me, that's what suburbia needs to do. And I'm curious about that integration. The problem we've got too, is the enterprises themselves are building campuses. Their goal is to keep the millennials eating, working, staying there. The small businesses in the town centers don't benefit unless that's connected as well.
Well, we're coming near the end of our program. I want to bring David back up. Let me just give my closing remark before David's, and that is, as I said at the very beginning, I actually do hundreds of these a year. I've been in most of your communities. Today, this was one of the best meetings I've ever attended. I found there was such great content from our panel, from your questions. Let me make a suggestion. There are hundreds and hundreds of people within 128 who are working with Secretary Pollack and the DOT to figure out the transportation plan for the inner core. And they're talking about whether we should extend the Green Line or not, given a $3 billion price tag now. How do we improve our Red Line and Orange Line, our bus service? What I would love to see, and it's just a suggestion, and you can boo me off the podium if you want, is with this new wonderful Boroughs Plus and with the 495 partnership, with the Metro West Chamber of Commerce, I would love to see you not end today by saying, great morning, but think about how you might get together with the business community, with the economic development directors, with the RTAs, and put forward a comprehensive program for transit in this area with some concrete funding mechanisms that will influence the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the legislature. I think you need to do that now because so much of the dialogue is over what are we doing with the T, and we need to have that dialogue around the transportation issues in this Boroughs Plus region. And I think you have the talent, you have the business community, you have brilliant people working in all of your organizations who could put together a task force and say, okay, we heard a lot this morning about the range of transportation options we have. We began to talk a little bit about funding, and if you, and I'd be more than happy to help on pro bono basis, if you could put together a transportation plan that went directly to Stephanie Pollack and went to the transportation chairs of the House and the Senate, I think we could make some tremendous progress based on what you've done this morning.
That's a phenomenal offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, David McKay.
Thank you, Barry. That was outstanding. I guess I get the last word, which I certainly appreciate, but I'll be very brief. I think this has been an outstanding discussion, and I echo everything that Barry just mentioned, and the thing that sort of comes out to me in this discussion, and I am the furthest thing from a transportation expert, but I am very interested in economic development issues, and the model that the 495 partnership has put together over the years, it's Paul and Jessica, but they are representing 35 communities. And what's clear to me throughout this discussion is that if we are going to begin to really address these issues in a meaningful, systematic way, it's going to require the type of public-private partnership that the 495 partnership has been working on for so long, and we see working in places like in Marlborough and Westboro and the other boroughs communities. And so I can't I can't overemphasize the great work that Paul and Jessica have done at the 495 partnership and really creating the kind of forum for this type of discussion. And I know that the local economic development committees are so pleased to be able to kind of supplement that and contribute to that discussion. In terms of those public-private partnerships, what I would offer up to the folks as kind of the next step for going forward, in building these transportation networks, because there are so many small companies that don't have the resources of a Google or a Boston Scientific, but yet still have these kinds of needs. Paul, Life Sciences as one example, Wegmans as another. That we need to build these networks, and it's going to require us talking to one another and continuing this discussion. I think that follows on Representative Kane's comments as well. In your packet, we made sure to include the contact information for the representatives from the Boroughs Plus Working Group. My contact information is out there. We do need your input, and we need your assistance to move these kinds of things forward. So particularly for the smaller companies, but for larger companies as well, if you have needs, please use your local economic development committee or the folks in your town hall that may be designated on economic development issues. Their contact information for each of the Boroughs Plus communities is in your packet, and that's going to help us immensely as we kind of take this to the next step and continue moving this discussion forward, because Paul and Jessica can't do it alone. They have 35 communities that they're working on, and we're going to have to help them out, and the EDCs are a perfect conduit, I think, along with the Chambers of Commerce, to continue bringing that message, to continue bringing that data forward. So, one other thing, the community compact that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned also could provide an outstanding funding mechanism for the Boroughs Plus communities to partner up to start doing some of this work, because as wonderful as it is that Professor Bluestone has volunteered to help us out on a pro bono basis, we're probably going to require some resources to put this kind of a plan together, and that may be the perfect way to get some resources to do that. So with that, I want to thank all of you so much for your questions, for participating in our discussion. I want to thank each of our panelists and the Lieutenant Governor, who did an outstanding job with the discussion today. Ed Carr from the Metro West RTA, Mary Beth Stewart from Wegmans, Paul Matthews from the 495 Partnership, Jim Robbins from the town of Westboro, and Bill Spencer from Paul Life Sciences. Thank you very much. There are small gift bags next to each of your chairs. Don't forget to bring that with you. And folks, thank you very much, and please give our panelists a